The government calls him a thug, a cold-blooded murderer of 2 FBI agents. To his supporters, and he has many, Leonard Peltier is the victim of a federal frame-up. Amnesty International considers Peltier an American political prisoner, locked up in Leavenworth Prison, sentenced to spend the rest of his life there. What is certain is that Leonard Peltier has become a symbol to Indian people all across the country. What's uncertain is whether he got a fair trial and whether the government convicted the right man.
On June 26, 1975, on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation, 2 FBI agents, Jack Kohler and Ronald Williams, were shot to death virtually at point-blank range with rifles.
Mm-hmm.
Did you kill them?
No, I did not. No.
You didn't pull the trigger?
No, I never killed those agents.
Did you fire at those agents?
Yes, I fired at them.
Why?
Because they were firing at me, and I fired back.
Are you guilty of anything?
The only thing I'm guilty of is trying to help my people. That's the only thing I'm guilty of.
Leonard Peltier's people live here, the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation in the Badlands of South Dakota, a landscape long stained with blood. It was here barely 100 years ago that the U.S. 7th Cavalry destroyed the great Sioux Nation. Today, the survivors battle extinction and poverty unmatched anywhere in America. For many here, the war continues, and they see Leonard Peltier as the last Sioux brave.
He's a warrior to me. He's a warrior.
To understand the case, you must understand the times. In 1973, a radical group known as the American Indian Movement took over and occupied government offices at Wounded Knee, South Dakota. The bitter standoff with an army of federal agents lasted 71 days. And from that point on, the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation was an armed camp, thought to have the highest concentration of FBI agents in the country. There were SWAT teams and government memos proposing paramilitary operations in Indian country, all during a time of well-documented government misconduct against dissident political groups, including the American Indian Movement, known as AIM. Bob Robidoux was a member of AIM.
It was the United States government that created the conditions that prevailed on the Pine Ridge Reservation because at that time they were conducting a war against these people.
Robidoux, Leonard Peltier, and other AIM members were camped out on the Jumping Bull Ranch the day FBI agents Jack Kohler and Ronald Williams drove onto the property, ostensibly looking for a young Indian boy accused of stealing a pair of cowboy boots. The agents were uninvited and unwelcome, and within moments, shots rang out.
At the time, did you know who fired the first shot?
No, I didn't.
Did it make any difference?
It didn't make any difference at all. These 2 strangers were firing on these homes, which were occupied by women and children. And we were asked to come to this reservation to protect this community, and that's exactly what we did.
Both Robidoux and Peltier admit firing at the agents from long range during a firefight that lasted an hour and left the 2 agents badly wounded. But they deny the government's contention that Leonard Peltier then went down to the agents' cars and executed the 2 helpless FBI men at point-blank range with a high-powered rifle.
I know Leonard didn't do it because I was with him every step of the way. When we went up to the cars, the 2 agents were dead.
Bob Robidoux and another Indian man by the name of Darrell Butler were eventually captured, tried, and found not guilty of killing the FBI agents. The jury ruled it was self-defense. Today, Leonard Peltier would almost certainly be a free man if he had stood trial with Robidoux and Butler. But he didn't. He fled, eventually to Canada, and he would have to face a separate trial. Peltier was captured and later extradited back to the United States on the strength of 3 affidavits from an emotionally disturbed woman by the name of Myrtle Forbear, who swore that she saw Peltier kill agents Kohler and Williams in cold blood. Even the government now admits that those affidavits were fabricated. We found Myrtle Forbear last month in Rapid City, South Dakota.
The first time I met Leonard was when he went to trial in Fargo, North Dakota.
You'd never met him before?
I've never met him before.
Flat broke and frightened, she says the FBI coerced her testimony by threatening to take her daughter away.
They said, you're going to know him because you're going to testify against him in court. And we're going to tell you everything about him. That way you'll know him.
So they wrote this up and you signed it?
Yes, I did.
Myrtle Poorbear eventually came forward and changed her story. But when she tried to testify for the Peltier defense, the judge ruled her incompetent. Assistant U.S. Attorney Lynn Crooks put together the case against Peltier for the government. I spoke with him 3 years ago about the Poorbear affidavits, and he defended their use.
Doesn't bother my conscience. If everything they say is right on that, doesn't bother my conscience one bit. The man's a murderer. He got convicted on fair evidence. Doesn't bother my conscience one whit. I don't agree that we did anything wrong with that, but I can tell you it don't bother my conscience if we did.
Besides the Poorbear episode, the jury would never hear about another extraordinary flaw in the government's evidence against Peltier, the only physical evidence linking him to the crime. The prosecution maintained that this AR-15 rifle belonged to Peltier and that a shell casing ejected from it was found near the agents' bodies in the trunk of their car. But in this government teletype, which the FBI later tried to disavow, the government's own weapons expert reported that the shell casing found in the car trunk in fact did not match up with the firing pin in Peltier's rifle. But Peltier's jury never saw the teletype because Peltier's lawyers didn't get it until years after the trial, when they forced the government to release it under the Freedom of Information Act. In fact, the government still refuses to release some 6,000 pages of documents relating to Peltier's case. Federal Judge Gerald Haney heard Peltier's appeal. He recalls just how important it was to the government's case to establish that Peltier's rifle had been used to kill the 2 FBI agents.
It was critical, and the government concedes it was critical.
Judge Haney would eventually rule that there was a possibility that the withheld evidence and the government's misconduct in fabricating the Myrtle Poorbear affidavits might have changed the jury's mind. But that was not enough to meet the legal standard for giving Peltier a new trial. Haney said it was the most difficult decision of his career.
Do you believe he got a fair trial?
I believe he got a fair trial. Not a perfect trial, but a fair trial.
How would you characterize the whole Myrtle Poorbear incident?
I think it's a disgrace.
Yet the jury never heard it.
The jury never heard it.
Who do you think was responsible for the shootout on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation that day?
I think that both the American Indians and the FBI were responsible.
The jury not only didn't hear about the government's misconduct in the case, they heard nothing about tensions on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation. That, too, was ruled inadmissible.
I mean, if the government was going to go out and frame somebody, it wouldn't have been Leonard Peltier. He's a nobody. He's a murderer.
Senator Daniel Inouye, chairman of the Select Committee on Indian Affairs, has joined 50 U.S. congressmen, Amnesty International, and world leaders from the Archbishop of Canterbury to Nelson Mandela in calling for Leonard Peltier's freedom.
I think if you add up all the evidence, and if all the truth came out, that the affidavits were fabricated, that the ballistic information would show that this gun was not in any way involved, I think a reasonable jury would have found him not guilty.
If Leonard Peltier insists he did not execute the 2 FBI agents that day on the Jumping Bull Ranch, who was it that went down to the agent's car and shot the wounded FBI men in the face with a high-powered rifle? It's a secret Leonard Peltier and others have carried with them for 15 years.
Did anyone go down to the cars where the FBI agents were?
Well, there was 2 individuals in his red pickup, which drove down there, and the passenger got out. That's about as far as I can go.
You know who they were?
Yes.
Can you tell us?
No. Nope.
The red pickup truck has always been one of the great unsolved mysteries of the Peltier case. About an hour after the shootout began, an FBI agent on the scene reported over the radio that he saw a red pickup truck fleeing the Jumping Bull Ranch. The vehicle was never apprehended, the passengers never identified, until this year, when someone came forward offering not only an explanation, but a confession.
The death of those agents was brought about by their behavior, their wrongful behavior, not mine. I did not choose to take their lives. I only chose to save my own.
We know him only as Mr. X, This interview was conducted by author Peter Matheson. It was Matheson's book, In the Spirit of Crazy Horse, that first brought the Peltier case to the public's attention. We bought the interview from an outside film company and cannot vouch for its accuracy. But the man behind the mask seems intimate with every detail of the shootout. He says that he was driving the red pickup truck that day and that the FBI agents were following him when they drove onto the ranch.
We saw them coming up from behind, and we were concerned because we were carrying explosives. We got out with our rifles. We didn't point them at them, we had them down to our side. We knew it was illegal to have a rifle on you. And they stopped immediately and jumped out with rifles. One brought his rifle up to his shoulder. At that time, we dropped down behind the pickup, and he fired. We immediately returned fire.
It was the beginning of the hour-long shootout. Mr. X says that he retreated in the red pickup truck loaded with explosives when Peltier, Robidoux, and other AIM members began firing on the agents from long range. And when the wounded FBI men stopped returning fire, the red pickup truck returned. We asked Peltier to tell us what happened next.
I can't do that, Steve. I can't.
Why not?
I'm not a rat. I'm not a snitch. I'm not an informant. And first of all, second of all, we sincerely believed in what we were struggling for, and to turn against one of your own and start pointing fingers, in my heart and my mind, would be treason.
Why treason?
Because they're the enemy. They've been the one that's oppressed my people, have nearly exterminated my people. I lived it, I experienced it, I witnessed it. So nobody can tell me any different.
Mr. X claims he approached the wounded agents, still not exactly sure who they were, hoping, he says, to get them to surrender.
I advanced a few feet, and I was right point-blank range. There was one that was on the ground. He raised up this, what I would consider quickly, bringing up a pistol, which he fired, but he fired it as kind of at an angle where it went into the ground. At that point, I did not give him a chance to fire again. I fired, and as soon as I shot him, I immediately, instantaneously fired at the other fellow and hit him also.
Mr. X thinks if he comes forward and identifies himself, the FBI will arrest him and the government will still keep Leonard Peltier in prison.
I pray that this will do it, that people become aware and hear my voice and know that I'm speaking the truth, that Leonard Peltier is innocent.
In recent months, Peltier has found new and unexpected help from the man who refused to grant him a new trial. Federal Court Judge Gerald Haney wrote a letter about Peltier's case to Senator Inouye, which has been forwarded to the White House.
I outline some of the reasons that the president might wish to consider in determining whether he would commute Leonard Peltier's sentence.
At the least, he should get a new trial, but I would hope that the President of the United States would examine the case and say that 14 years under these circumstances would be enough. The time for healing has arrived. Let him loose.
On October 2nd, Peltier's lawyers will be back in court in Bismarck, North Dakota, trying to win a new trial. Hundreds of Native Americans will be there to lend their support, certain of one thing, that Leonard Peltier, like Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse, is just the latest martyr of their people.
Let's outback. Let's get together with our mates and pass plates. Let's cheers to finally getting drinks. Let's steal a shrimp from a mate. Let's share a bite of perfectly grilled steak.